Good morning, friends. Welcome to our daily Dharma. Today, we're going to continue to explore Dukkha. And today, as I mentioned yesterday, I want to talk a little bit about Dukkha as a common characteristic, along with anicca and anatta, right? And then Dukkha as a first noble truth. I think it's kind of interesting. Dukkha as a common characteristic, which is more how I've been approaching it this week, just is. It's just part of the fabric that makes up this reality, that things are unsatisfactory, as I mentioned yesterday. So that just is. There's not necessarily suffering tied up in that. It doesn't, that reality of that things are anicca, dukkha, anatta, that reality is not bound to suffering. Suffering is extra. Dukkha as a noble truth, of course, the first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering, and it has a cause. The cause, of course, the second noble truth, craving, right? Tanha in Pali. Craving for sense pleasures, craving for becoming, craving for non-becoming. You could say, and I think it's a nice way to understand these kind of two ways we can dukkha is in our lives. That dukkha as a common characteristic, again, is not necessarily, there's no suffering inherent in it. It's just how things are. The suffering comes when there's reactivity to that, when there's not the wise view that knows how things are and therefore can just be concomitant with it. The suffering comes when there's not that wise view and there's reactivity to the fact that that's how things are. That reactivity results in the suffering aspect of dukkha as a first noble truth. Let's just use an example. This thing just popped into my head. You know, we teach from who we are, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes maybe not so good, but not so much anymore. But I used to more watch sports and, you know, cheer for one team. And, you know, you want them to win, but you can't control it. You can't control if they're going to like make the shot or the pass or whatever. It's outside of your control. And sometimes they don't win. And that's unsatisfactory, right? That's dukkha as a common characteristic. So it's just the first layer of dukkha, right? Dukkha in the body, in the mind. So here it is. It's like, you know, they didn't win. Now, if one is really on board with this, then yeah, there maybe there's a little annoyance, or maybe not even. It's like, yeah, I'm not in charge, right? This vulnerability aspect, that's another great translation that I like of dukkha, vulnerability. I want this team to win, but I have no control over it. And now, you know, you could plug anything into what you want and that you don't have control over the outcome, right? That's dukkha. That's the vulnerability aspect of dukkha. And if we're really on board with that, it's like, yes, we would rather fill in the blank, but we know not in our control and no suffering. There's a preference, that's fine, but we're not attached to the preference. And so no suffering. Okay. Other scenario, the team doesn't win or fill in the blank. And we're not on board with that. This truth of that we're not in control is not really in the forefront of our hearts and minds. It's not the reality that we're inhabiting, and we rail against it. That coach, I can't believe they did that, and those players stink. Why don't they? We're writing letters to the team, and you know, we're crazed. and we're suffering. The heart and mind are completely agitated. So there can be dukkha as a common characteristic that doesn't include suffering. And yet, depending how we relate to, meaning depending how wise our view is to include that common characteristic in our view of reality, is whether that will depend on whether there'll be suffering involved in relation to that common characteristic or not. So this is the difference between dukkha as a common characteristic and dukkha as the first noble truth, the noble truth of suffering, and that it has a cause. And of course, so that's a that's a kind of a didactic verbal explanation I just gave. How we really know this is in our own experience, yeah. And what we do, we bring sati, mindfulness, samadhi, concentration, to bear on our experience so we can see it clearly. And these things over time are just very spontaneously and naturally known. So let's go ahead and practice honing the tools so that we can bring them to bear on the experiences of our life and glean this wisdom. Settling into your posture. And, I use that word specifically, settling, relaxing, softening. The opposite of being agitated, settled. And we can't demand it. We can intend it. We do have some degree of control over our body, not complete, but some. And so we can consciously soften, relax. There's that analogy about the muddy water settling that gets used. It's really a good one. And also, it's good because how it settles, things don't settle, the particles don't settle sideways or up. They settle by sinking down, don't they? The energy of the body sinks downwards. And if we're paying attention, the attention follows that downwards. And then we very naturally become aware of the body contacting what's underneath it because we're following the energy down. And as we pay attention to the body settling, energy sinking downward, there's a way that the attention also sinks downwards into the body. We're not watching it from above, we're inside of it, knowing it from the inside out. This is what we mean when we say having an embodied attention. Cultivating calm body sitting and feeling that being connected to calm body sitting somatically. calm body breathing. Also, a somatic experience. We don't leave the body to feel the breath. Relaxing the body to the degree that we can allow the body to breathe on its own. Allowing the body to be gently affected, kind of rocked. Maybe that's too strong a word, but by the rhythms of the in and out breathing. This can have a very calming effect on the body. Every in breath, every out breath that's known, that's connected to, every moment of body sensation that's known is a moment of mindfulness, a moment of strengthening that mind state, a moment of present time awareness. Just sitting, just breathing. Can we rest with the simplicity of that? Thank you for your practice. I rang the bell a little early this morning because I wanted to address what happened yesterday. We all know what happened at the Capitol yesterday, or I'm assuming we all know. I guess some people don't watch the news. And the reason I want to address it is because the Eightfold Path is wide and it encompasses all of our lives, all of anything that's possible that happens in the world is the Eightfold Path, or it's the Eightfold Path in terms of how we relate to it. But there's nothing that's left out, of the practice. And one could say that our practice is about seeing what hasn't been seen. We become aware of the common characteristics that we hadn't seen before: change, unsatisfactoriness, not self. We didn't see with those eyes, and then we start to experience life through that lens. We start to see how craving, how the mind that wants and doesn't want is actually the cause of our suffering, and how we create our own suffering, not something outside of us. We start to see things in ways that we hadn't before, that much of our practice is about waking up in that way. In a similar, very similar way, for white people, much of our practice can be, if we choose for it to be, about waking up to the truth of that we live in a racist society and a racist country. That it's actually always been that way. It was designed to be that way and is still that way today. Again, I'm talking about white people, don't see that because of our white people's privileged position. But we can if we choose to, just like if we choose to cultivate the Eightfold Path, we can see these things. If we choose to, we can see very clearly racism at play today and learn about how it was structured and woven in even to the Constitution. The tragedy yesterday from this viewpoint was not that our holy, sanctuary of Congress got breached. Not a good thing. But from this perspective, the tragedy of yesterday was how the mostly white rioters were treated with kid gloves, if that. What if those people were brown and black? That's the tragedy. That's discrepancy is the tragedy. And I just want to name that as yet another example of how racism continues to manifest in our society. And I want to suggest to white people that if our Eightfold Path, if our practice does not include the examination of this, both in our society and in our own hearts and minds, that it's an incomplete Eightfold Path. And it can really tie it into, well, of course, freedom from suffering, but even our sila practice. When we don't see this, this is what happens. So I just want to offer that because, it's really up in our country today, and encourage all of our white brothers and sisters in the Dharma to really take it upon yourself in the same way you would explore all the other aspects of our practice, to explore this aspect if you haven't started already. There's tons of resources out there. I don't need to start to name them. All one has to do is just start looking. Okay, friends, this might be a good day to practice some metta. I know I was sitting this morning and the heart and mind was quite agitated. It's in the zeitgeist, right? It's quite a disturbing event that happened yesterday on many levels, right? So maybe a good day for metta practice. I wish you well today. See you again tomorrow morning, and we'll continue with exploring this common characteristic of dukkha. Okay, bye bye for now.